fitness enthusiasts and ultimate Frisbee aficionados to the TOBU Fitness Podcast. Your guide to elevating your game and mastering the art of ultimate Frisbee through the lens of strength and conditioning. Whether you're a seasoned player or just stepping onto the field for the first time, this podcast is your one-stop destination for unlocking your true potential. This is the TOBU Fitness Podcast with your host, certified strength and conditioning coach, Justin Shelby.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the TOBU Fitness Podcast. It's been a really long time since I've done an interview podcast or just a podcast in general. Last podcast episode I released was Thanksgiving here, so the end of November. Now we're into 2025. Got an interview here with a very special guest I've been excited to talk to. This is Eric. Eric, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Justin. It's very exciting to be here and happy to chat. I know we had a few conversations before this and I think we get along. So excited to have a fruitful conversation.
Yeah. So I know who you are. I'm sure a lot of people know who you are because you've kind of made a big splash on the ultimate scene. Like when I go through your Instagram, like a lot of the videos are pretty viral. So I'd venture to say most people have seen your content. But yeah, do you want to tell people about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, myself right now, I play for Sydney Thunder, the premier opens club in Australia. But it wasn't always like that. My background was in badminton when I first started. I played badminton for a while before I picked up ultimate. I was actually a badminton coach for 5 years, so that's where my coaching background comes from. And I picked up ultimate in 2021 and kind of took off from there. So had the opportunity to train, improve, play worlds and play Australian nationals, things like that. But now very much working towards the next big goals in club ultimate and some national things upcoming as well. So that's where I'm at the moment, trying to make a bigger impact as a player, but also help people along the way.
Yeah, I think I can relate to that too. Like as somebody who also makes content in the ultimate space, I think me as a coach goes a billion times farther than me as a player. Like I get questions about if I play ultimate. So that tells me that people know that I'm more of a coach than a player. But for yourself, you know, you mentioned being a player, being a coach, like which one's taken a little bit more priority for you, if either?
Yeah, I think it kind of goes through seasons, right? And like in life, we go through seasons of different focus. And so certainly when I was first trying to make bounds in my playing ability, like I recall in 2021, it was kind of my first year playing properly. And I had played my first tournament in March that year. And I actually got cut from my university team in August at that time. And so that was kind of a pain point. I'm sure when everyone goes to that experience of getting cut from a team they really wanted to make, kind of puts a bit of a fire in you to want to train and get better. And so during that season of improvement, definitely being a player and improving myself technically and also strength-wise and conditioning-wise was the big priority for me. I think now it's kind of a bit of a balancing act between the two. There's a lot of priorities in life when it comes to work and sport, helping other people as well. So for me, I'm kind of in that middle ground between making a bigger impact at Thunder and my club, but also trying to disseminate as much information as I can that I'm picking up from my club and from the experiences that I've done. So it's a bit tricky at times because it's busy, but kind of just got to give it a crack, I guess.
For sure. Yeah. What are the things that like motivate you to want to do that, like make that bigger impact and make content?
Yeah, that's a great question, Justin. I think for me, when I was trying to get better, I mean, I looked everywhere online for resources, right? I went through all the rowing stuff and all the technical stuff on YouTube and whatever I could find, you know, even the Brody Smith stuff, right? Anything on throwing I could find, that's what I was trying to say. But there wasn't really anything that that really took me to where I wanted to go. It was all like little tidbits, and they certainly helped, but it wasn't until I kind of got the right help in my circles in Sydney with the elite players in Sydney that helped me kind of take my game to the next level once I understood, okay, what are the actual things that the top players do? So I think my bigger motivation for kind of starting this coaching journey for Ultimate was kind of trying to help my former version of myself. You know, when I was starting and trying to get better, I wish I had just a few more resources when it came to development, just a little bit of more guidance when it came to knowing what throw set to do or knowing what sort of cutting or defense drills to do. So I think that's where my motivation stemmed, and now it's kind of turned into something a little bit bigger, but that's the core of it. I wish I'm trying to give back the lessons that I wish I knew when I was trying to improve to save myself some trial and error time, if that makes sense.
Totally. No, that does. Yeah. And I think I can definitely relate to that. Also, again, as somebody who makes content, like I think we know in this space that the things that are going to go viral are like the shiny objects, right? Like no context whatsoever. Just like here's something that's really, really cool, goes viral. You're going to see it like shared all over the place. But yeah, it's not the most helpful thing because you don't have that context surrounding it, right? So at least in like the exercise side of things that I can speak to, like it's you can show somebody an exercise, but if you actually want to be able to apply it and do well, like you've got to have the entire picture. And usually like having a full coaching plan or a training plan helps out. And I imagine that's kind of the same thing you're saying here.
Yeah, I think one tidbit, like one kind of nuance of, I guess, content is trying to share the most value to the most amount of people, right? And as you're saying, sometimes it's difficult to try and deliver a full picture of value and try get it to the most people possible, right? And so in that scenario, there's a little bit of nuance behind like making sure that, you know, you got the right hooks and you got the right storytelling to make it actually engaging. And that way you're kind of playing the algorithm a bit, but then also making sure everyone gets the value that you're trying to deliver. And so it's kind of, yeah, again, a bit of a balancing act of figuring out, okay, how can I deliver the most value, but deliver it in a way that's engaging so that the system, the algorithm pushes it so that I can actually help more people. And so I think that's a bit of a background that, you know, you probably have some context in, and that I'm kind of trying to work towards is like, how do we actually deliver the most value in a deliverable way that gets pushed out to people so we can actually help more people? That's my 2 cents. Yeah.
No, that doesn't make sense. I mean, that's where, at least for me personally, like the longer form stuff definitely does well. The analogy I kind of use often is it's like a fishing net, right? Like I can put out a 30-second reel and it's going to cast this really, really big net. But from there, if you want to get more specific and you want to teach people, it's like 30-second reels aren't that great. And I'm sure you can relate, like you can probably show a couple throws here and there, but it's like the context of when you would use it, how you would use it, like that longer form stuff, like YouTube or podcasts even are really when you can deliver the most punch.
Yeah, totally. I mean, when I was trying to get better, there was nothing on Instagram. Everything was on YouTube. It was like how to throw a chicken wing or like top 10 throws that I've never thrown in game or something like that. It was ridiculous. But the idea is like, if you can dive into more of those details and those longer form videos, maybe there are a few more nuggets that you can take out. Maybe there are some things that you can add in your game that you haven't thought about before. So that's always on the cards. If you're listening and kind of you're thinking, oh, I want to take it to another level, maybe diving in a bit more deeper into other forms of content on YouTube. There's always great stuff out there. So just have a look. It's not too hard to find.
For sure. I know that there's this kind of a stigma too around books. I guess like if you were to think somebody wrote a book on Ultimate, like you might roll your eyes, but the couple books on Ultimate that I've seen so far have actually had a ton of value. And you got to think too, like with a YouTube video or a podcast, like literally like there's no barrier to entry to just create a video and post it up on YouTube. Or like me making starting a podcast, like sounds very daunting at first, but it's really, yeah, you just start recording and like, you know, anybody with a mic can start a podcast. But making a book, like you have to actually sit down and write, put out all your thoughts, get it edited, get it published. Like that's a whole process. And yeah, at least the couple of books that I've seen on Ultimate have had a ton of value as well. But I guess speaking of value, right? So you have the Instagram where you're making the short form stuff, like, and I know you have like the course in the community as well. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, essentially it kind of ties into kind of getting into more detail. As you mentioned, like it's tough to get all the detail out on the short form content on Instagram. So I just have a cheeky little free community where people can jump in and learn a few things in a bit more depth. So there's some videos there, but still very much growing. There's only about 1,400 people in there at the moment, close to 1.5, which is quite considerable. But the idea is it's a place for Ultimate players to find community to try and improve together. And I think like one thing about Ultimate, sometimes especially as you're trying to get better and improve, you can kind of get into a bit of a grind set, if you know what I mean. Focused on like, what's the next thing to get better in? What's the next throw I got to master? But I think sometimes it's better to take a step back and think about, okay, like, let me just approach this the right way. Let me actually have fun. Let me connect with people along the way. So that's the goal with the free community there, is to help people get connected and to learn in a fun and engaging way.
That's awesome. You say 1.5 thousand people? So 15.
Yeah, I think it's 1,486 right now.
Yeah, that's awesome. Like,
Yeah.
one for you, like, congrats on building that big of a community, but also like that's a lot of people that are trying to get better, which is pretty dang cool.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. I mean, when I first launched it, I just put in 2 training plans and 10 throw sets inside. So I think a lot of people joined for those throw sets and for those training plans. To be honest, since then it's been a little bit inactive, but I've got some exciting things planned. Hopefully, we'll get everyone engaged and using the community more to be more engaged and to help them get better. So that's the plan on the horizon, and yeah, trying to get those 1.4K, 1.5K closer to 2K, and then get more people active as well.
Yeah, that's awesome. So, what are like the biggest questions you're getting in the community itself? Like, is there specific themes that like most players are struggling with?
Yeah, there's 2 buckets mainly. The first bucket of players is or members' questions are players that come with a specific question in mind. And so they might already be very clear on what they want to work on, and they just have this one problem that they need to get solved. And so this might be like, oh, the most common one is my flick huck is turning over early in its flight. And so that's the first bucket. Questions where players have one specific problem that they need to get solved. The other bucket is a little bit more broad. It's more of a question of players that are wanting to make a particular squad or not exactly sure what they need to work on to make that particular squad. So it kind of falls under this umbrella of, hey, Eric, I want to make this squad. I'm not sure how I can make a bigger impact. Or, hey, Eric, I'm starting this new season. I want to make a bigger impact as a hybrid. Those are probably the most common ones. And I think the first one is a pretty easy fix. Like, okay, you're after one problem. Let me help you solve that. And the second one takes a bit of context in terms of thinking about understanding how development ultimate works. I kind of take them through my pillars, how I think about the game. And then we kind of go from there and figure out, okay, what is the next priority? What do you need in your game to make a big impact? As you know, Justin, like, with anything, and with Ultimate in particular, it's so complex, right? Like, if you just think about one category, throwing, for example, when throwing, there's like throwing shape, throwing touch, throwing distance, throwing power, release points, high releases, low releases, wide releases, pivots, release speeds. There's just so much, right? And that's just throwing. We're not even talking about defense, cutting, receiving, catching, any of that. And so as Ultimate players, it's impossible to try and work on everything at once. And so if you want to take a big bound in your development, and this is the big principle that I applied, right, is you kind of have to take a step back and think, okay, what is the one thing in my game that I can work on maybe for the next week or 2 weeks or month that's going to help me actually get good in that one area, that specific area of that category, so that I can tick that off, be happy with it, and move on to the next thing, and move on to the next thing, and move on to the next thing. The idea is you kind of want to spend a bit of time ticking off one thing at a time instead of trying to go for everything and not improving at anything else at any one time, if that makes sense.
No, that definitely does. Good kind of principle I always like to follow. I actually got this from a business book, but I can't remember the title. But basically, I mean, with like we talked about last time, like business a lot of times applies to life and especially to sport here too. Like all the principles are universal. But yeah, this business principle, it was like, a lot of people find comfort in confusion, right? Like it's a lot easier just to be like, oh man, I don't know what I have to do to start this business. Like I need, I have to get the real estate and the licensing or whatever. It's like so much easier just to find that comfort in the confusion and not take action. And I mean, that can apply to anything. It kind of sounds like this too. It's like if there's so many things that you want to improve on, it's really easy just to be like, oh man, I've got to improve. Like I suck. There's so many things I have to do. I'm never going to get better. Versus like what you're saying, like just find that one thing and probably the thing that's going to give you the biggest bang for your buck, and then try to improve that before trying to move on to everything else. Is that kind of what you're saying there?
You're completely right. Yeah, the one thing that I heard in last week that's really resonated with me is where focus goes, energy flows. And so you kind of need to document and write down, okay, think what is that one thing in my game that is stopping me from getting to that next level. I think it was Tony Robbins that said that, where focus goes, energy flows. And so I'm a big believer in thinking, okay, how can we think about what is that one thing in our game? How can we almost obsess over it to a degree, right? I mean, the biggest balance in my throwing game was when I was just obsessing over throwing, right, every day. And I'm sure viewers that are listening that have made big bounds in their throwing can relate, right? You probably went out and threw like every day, maybe for half an hour, right? And you probably got better as a result of it. And so where focus goes, energy flows. Where you can put focus in, that's where you're going to get that result. And that's how you can build different focuses over time and over the course of a week, 2 weeks, a month, 2 months, 2 years. That's how you actually build a comprehensive player in yourself.
I love that. Tony Robbins, another business guy. There we go.
Yeah. What a legend as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think he's like 60 years old or something like that. And he's still doing multi-day seminars and talking for hours every day. And so definitely something to aspire to. And also a note to listeners that it's never too old to get started. It's never too old to keep it going as well.
For sure. For sure. So when you mentioned that process of just kind of like unpacking what it is like that you need to work on, and also you mentioned like your pillars of how you view the game. Can you walk us through like, what that process kind of looks like if you're talking to a new player or maybe somebody who wants to try to do this on their own? Like what should they be thinking about?
Yeah, absolutely. Let me give you so I'll walk you through exactly my pillars I go through with members that kind of come in and what I explain to them. Again, this is kind of like the 4 key development pillars that I use to kind of think about the game. And when I understood these, it really helped me think about how the sport is played and how I can apply my focus. So if you can understand these key pillars, it'll really help you contextualize your development and where to focus from there. Usually I will draw it up on my whiteboard, but for the purpose of the podcast, I don't want to turn away from the microphone. So I'll just give you a visual demonstration with my hands. So at the very top, we have ultimate success. That is the goal, being able to execute on the field, play the best level you can be. And you can imagine this kind of Roman pyramid or Roman structure, like a pantheon. Or now I'm thinking about a different architectural thing, but imagine a big thing with 4 pillars. And underneath the ultimate success are the 4 pillars that support it. And so these are the things that we actually do on the field. At every moment in time when we're playing Ultimate Frisbee, we're either doing one of these 4 things. They are throwing, cutting, catching, and defense. At every moment in time on the Ultimate Frisbee field, you're doing one of those things. Even if you're standing still, you're still cutting indirectly because you're making space for other people, you're getting ready to cut, etc. So those are your 4 pillars: throwing, cutting, catching, and defense. From there, let's say a member comes to me and says, "Hey, Eric, I don't know what role I should go for. I don't know. I want to make this squad, but I don't know where to start." Step 1 is to figure out what is the role you're actually going for. Because the requirements to be an O-line handler are going to be very different to be a D-line hybrid or a D-line receiver, right? Or a water bottle boy on the sideline. Yeah. So the idea is you need to figure out, okay, what is the role you actually want to go for? From there, actually sit down and write down these 4 pillars: throwing, cutting, catching, defense, and rank it out of 10. What level do you need in each and every one of them, right? Maybe to be that D-line receiver, you need to be a 10 in catching. Maybe you don't need that good of a throws. Maybe you only need a 6, right? Maybe you need good cutting. Maybe you need great defense. So write it all out. Then the next step is to figure out, okay, where are you actually there at the moment? Where are you in that rating at the moment? So go back into it and rate yourself out of 10, right? Maybe I'm a 5 out of 10 in throwing. Maybe I'm a 6 out of 10 in defense. From there, find the one pillar that has the biggest gap. That is going to be your development pillar. Now, we talked earlier about how each pillar is so complex, right? Throwing has so many categories. Defense, it's not just about defense. It's defensive positioning. It's defensive footwork. It's anticipation. It's laying out, right? Once you find that pillar, then you got to figure out, okay, what is that one thing, little detail in that pillar, that little focus that I can actually work on to make an improvement in that area, and then work for a week on it. Move on to the next area. Work on that for a week. Move on to the next area until over the course of a few weeks, you become a better defender. That's the kind of one-on-one in terms of how I like to think about development and how I like to think about, in particular, making a particular squad. But yeah, that's the rundown there. Does that kind of make sense?
No, that does. I like that a lot. Have you have you found there's a specific pillar that people have the biggest like discrepancy in? Like, is there a common theme there?
Yeah, there's 3 buckets of players. Number 1 is players that have maybe had an athletic background and just started playing Ultimate, maybe in the last 2 to 3 years, and everything else is great, but it's their throwing that needs work. So that's a big discrepancy there where they kinda are looking for that throwing guidance, if that makes sense. The other bucket of players is players that have been playing maybe from youth or, you know, players that have been playing for a while and have good skills all around, but they're trying to make an elite team now, right? So they never played Division 1 or they've never played on a national team. And so usually, and this is a generalization, for those top teams, they're looking for defenders to fill those roster spots. And so that bucket of players, even though everything across the board is good, usually it's the defense that has the biggest discrepancy. Because to be an elite level team and an elite level defender, you need to just have 11 out of 10 defense, if that makes sense. And the last bucket of players is players that are above average in everything and don't excel at any one thing. So from there, my advice is usually, all right, take a step back and think about what type of impact you want to be as a player. Like, what is your brand of Ultimate? Think about what is that area that when you play, you just feel the most excited towards and you want to stay on the field for. That's when we go take a step back and we lean into that. And then we figure out, okay, so in detail, what do you have in this pillar? And then what are the little tidbit skill sets that you still need to fill out that pillar completely? So those are the 3 buckets there.
Nice. If you don't mind me asking, for yourself as a player, which bucket do you fill in?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm going to take some time to think about that, figure it out. So the first bucket is kind of newer players that are wanting to improve on throwing. Now, I don't feel like I fall in there, or else we all have opportunities to improve our throwing. So I'm going to be humble and say that I still need to get better there. The second bucket is players that want to make an elite team and need to work on the defense. Now, when I figured that out, I made a big bound in my defense. I spent a lot of time focusing on that. So I don't necessarily think I fall into that bucket anymore. I think I fall into the last bucket, which is now I'm getting to a point in my career where, I'm not the rookie D-line player anymore. I'm making a little bit more impact when it comes to holding the disc and playing on turn, having opportunities to play offense as well, which is very exciting. So now it's kind of thinking, all right, how do I take my game and what it is, and how do I find my brand and excel more across the board? And so when it comes to development, again, as I mentioned, it's hard to work on everything at once. You can't excel across the board. So how do we find little skills here and there from each of the pillars to spend week blocks focusing on, so that over time you can actually make bounds in those areas? So I think I fall into that last bucket, Justin.
I personally am in the second bucket, I guess, the needs to improve defense to make an elite team one. But yeah, I like how you break that down a lot. Kind of to add my perspective into it too. Like, I've always thought about Ultimate, like, to put it very, very basic, because obviously you spend a lot of time really breaking it down, which is awesome. Keep it really simple, right? For me, there's the things that require an increase in athleticism, and there's the things that require a increase in skill, right? And for me, I just throw that skill stuff out the window, because the only thing I focus on is the athleticism piece of it, right? And that's my whole brand, right? So I think from like a training perspective, right, if you can improve your athleticism, right, whether that is like the very generic thing that people immediately think about is like getting more explosive faster, change of direction, great. Like, cutting and defense are naturally going to get better, right? Conditioning is also a big one. I think that's often pretty underrated, I would say, like, with the defensive piece. And this is what I think about as being somebody in that bucket, is like, I'm pretty quick. Like, if we were just going to play 1 point, right, I would be able to stay with you, but like, how can I maintain that for an entire weekend, right? I want to make sure by game 6 that like I'm still able to keep the same explosiveness as game 1. Like, that's conditioning, that's work capacity, all that, right? But also, and like the with that, it's not, I don't think it's as simple as just saying like, And as you know, like it's not as simple as just saying like, okay, if you're just a freak athlete, like you're automatically going to be good at defense, because in that first bucket with newer players, like there's that positioning piece of it. So I guess you could say like the skill piece of it comes back. And it's super, super important. Also just the idea of like being able to stay on the field is something I talk about a lot, and like the injury prevention, so to speak. We can't really prevent injuries, but like if we can reduce the risk of injuries happening, like that's honestly probably the best skill I could give somebody, is like staying on the field. Um, so yeah, I like that breakdown there. And then just kind of thinking about like how training can kind of fit into that, like gym work or conditioning work can kind of fit into that. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, for me, funny how you mentioned the injury thing. Maybe something aside for the visual viewers out there. But the reason I actually started my Instagram page was because at the beginning of last year, I had broken my collarbone at Sunday training. And so I had like I was, could not run, could not do conditioning, could not do any running sets because of the risk of falling over and breaking my collarbone again. For the visual viewers, I hope this is okay, Justin, but this is what a normal collarbone looks like. All right, nice and straight and connected. This is my broken side.
Nice.
And so for me, that's why I started the page, because as soon as I could start throwing, like I couldn't run yet, but I could start throwing with my dominant arm. And so I just used the Instagram page to document my throwing journey to try and become a more impactful thrower. So that was just a little aside, how I kind of started my journey, because you mentioned the injury piece. So yeah, funny story.
That's awesome. So have you kind of like, I know you mentioned like the club team, but have there been other like big resources that have kind of fueled like your growth, like with the content, or like I assume like even just the process of posting and documenting that stuff, like you've probably learned and gotten questions and good conversations, but yeah, what's that been like?
Yeah, I'll give you my 201 when it comes to my kind of, I like to call it my development secrets, but it's really the three things that help me in my development journey. You touched on the first two, and these are knowledge and knowledge. I kind of spoiled the third one, knowledge and support. The idea is like I actually had that network of players. Even when I was trying to get better, I always bothered the best person on the field to try and figure out like what was that one thing that I needed to improve on at a random league game, right? I'd just ask the best player there. And so I had that expert knowledge because I could actually find out what the answers were instead of having to figure out myself, because I could just bother the people around me. And I was lucky enough to be invited to kind of those high level pods where I could get even more knowledge on that side. I was also fortunate enough to kind of get the support of a few senior players at Sunder at the time. One of my old high school teachers actually was a Sunder senior player. Like he was one of the captains of the Dingoes, the Australian men's team at a point in time. And so I'd reconnected with him, and he kind of brought me along to all of those trainings and encouraged me to keep it up, knowing that I wanted to make Sunder, and that was the goal a few years ago. And so that kind of ties into that accountability aspect. Is the biggest piece for me was actually having someone in my corner that would encourage me to go out and train, to check in with me every now and again, to make sure that I'm, being strung along to those pods and those kind of networking opportunities and those playing opportunities. That's what was one of the three things that helped me the most. So knowledge and support was the first two, but the accountability aspect was huge. And so after I made Sunder, knowing that I had an injury and knowing that I didn't want to stay on my butt all week, right? The idea was, let me document this. Let me apply the principles that I teach. Let me stay accountable here, and let me actually make some improvements to my game while I'm out. So I think like there's people always say injuries, obviously they suck. But I heard this quote from a teammate, and he said, sometimes injuries make you better. And that's kind of counterintuitive, but it kind of gives you an opportunity to take a step away from the game, recalibrate, and think about what it is in your game that you actually need to get to the next level. And so for me, I think having that injury and not being able to play for, 2 to 3 months made me a better thrower. And so if you're listening to this podcast out there and suffering from injury and being sidelined, think about what, it might be unfortunate to be in that situation and not playing, but what opportunities does that actually open up for you? Maybe there's more than you think.
For sure. As a trainer, I can definitely relate to that, because all the injuries I have had are the ones that I'm best at helping other people with. Like, there's no better learning process than just having done or experienced the injury. But also, yeah, I think that's a great point because you can, like, having an injury, like, really puts you into a different perspective, right? Of thinking about the game. Like, for me personally, like, I still can't throw a flick. I hurt my elbow back in August now, so we're on 6 months, which is crazy of me not being able to throw a flick. So you can imagine like the way I approach the game is very, very different. Hopefully most people don't have the same experience, but yeah, it really forces you to think outside the box, or even if that is like you can't go out and do physical stuff, but you can train like the mental side of it and watch more film and things like that.
I didn't know you had hurt your elbow. I mean, I was gonna comment on one of your posts, like, why are you only throwing lefties, Justin? But that explains it. No, yeah, no, you're exactly right. Like sometimes all you need is a step away from the sport to really think about how you're going to actually approach that next phase in your development. Again, we go through seasons, right? There's seasons of more introspection and more analysis, and then there's seasons of more execution and more doing, right? And it's okay no matter what season you're in, like it's okay to be there for a bit, but just know that, there's going to be another season that rolls around and you're going to have an opportunity to express yourself in a different way very soon. So I think about it like that. If you're ever going through a rough season, just know that it only lasts for a season. Summer's going to be around the corner and it's going to be beautiful Australian weather soon.
There you go. Yeah. I guess we're on opposite hemispheres so our seasons are flipped here too. You're in summer now?
Exactly. Yeah. So it's really warm and some days getting up to, 30s and high 30s. So yeah.
There you go. Yeah, I think that's a good point too. Like, I think episode 5 of this podcast had my friend Andrew Calvert on, who's another strength and conditioning coach, and I think he put it really, really well. It's like even in nature, like or I guess not even in nature, but like nature is the thing that like seasons are from. Like we pull this idea of like seasons from nature, and like think there's the spring and the summer where things are beautiful and things are growing, but like we can't maintain that all year long, all the time, right? Like there's the fall where things start to fall off, and then there's the winter where things look pretty ugly, but then that comes back around to that spring, and that allows spring and summer to be very, very beautiful. And I think, yeah, it's the same idea. It's like you can't just execute 365 days of the year. There has to be those times of like, things falling off, things like dying so that they can regrow and come back stronger and better than before.
Yeah, I love that. I think if I were to add on that analogy, I would say that there's beauty in winter as well. You just got to find it.
Totally. That's a good point too. Yeah. And I know like I imagine for you and probably the 1.5 thousand people that work with you, like your community is like that kind of place where the people can get the knowledge and the support and the accountability aspect. But do you also work with people in person? Like, is there a little bit more of that kind of like in a hands-on setting? What's that like for you?
The most I've done in person, and I've done a handful of, workshops with one-on-one people in Sydney, but that's kind of ad hoc. It's nothing that I, formally offer. The most significant kind of coaching aspect that I've done in person was actually coaching Macquarie University at Australian University Nationals. So coaching a whole team. So that's kind of been the biggest exposure that I've had to face-to-face in-person coaching. But it was almost second nature to me because, and we kind of touched on this at the beginning of the podcast, but my context, my background was badminton. And so the reason why I feel confident talking to people and talking to them about their development in the game is because I had spent 5 years doing that multiple hours a week with kids from 5 years old anywhere to adults 55 years old. And so I'd just been working with classes of 10 to 5 my whole teenage life, essentially. And so drawing on that, I've been able to really get that confidence and ability to share knowledge and share impact to players that want it. So it was a really good experience coaching University Nationals. We helped them deliver Macquarie University deliver their best result in the last 3 or 4 years. And so it was very exciting to coach that group, and it was very fun to have your own team. And, as a coach, you kind of get a bit of say, and you get all the say in terms of what structures you're on and how you want your players to play. And I think my team took a lot out of that. So yeah, shout out to them if they're listening.
That's awesome. Yeah. What's the biggest kind of thing that you have found is similar and different, I guess? Like, what's that experience like between being an online coach and helping people online versus in person with them?
I would say, contrary to what you might think, there's not that much difference. When I'm working with people online, we chat just like this, one-on-one. We work through what your next, 30 days is going to look like, what your next 60 days is going to look like when it comes to training. And there's still that one-on-one touch, right? We still work and talk in detail. It's as if we were there next to each other, but we're just not. The one difference, I would say that there is when it comes to in person is that you get a little bit more opportunity to fix the issues live. So when you're working through, a throwing drill, for example, right, you can kind of get that instant feedback. But to be honest, that's not too different from how I'm working with athletes in my group, which is like they'll come to me with their throwing form videos and we'll just dive into it and then they'll fix it. They'll have a disc with them on the spot and they will actually just go through it, right? And so like I always keep a disc handy with me so that I can just kind of demo, okay, cool. Right now you're holding with this particular inside. We want to use these fingers in this particular way. And so they still get that same amount of exposure. It's just that they can't apply it instantly on a field straight away. They could just apply it, in their office or whatever. The other thing is online, I work with members in a group setting as well, but I also work with members one-on-one. In a coaching environment, those one-on-one conversations aren't as structured. They're more ad hoc and it's more you working with the team as a whole. So it's less of that, like what's going to work for you one-on-one in the next 30 days to make you a better player. It's more so like, how can I make this team the best of the next 30 days? And how can I make you the best player for our team in that next 30 days? And so maybe there's a little bit less personalization when it comes to that team environment, although you try your best to give as much as you can, but at the end of the day, there's only so much time you can spend talking to each individual on the team.
That makes sense. And then I imagine in that coaching role, like kind of what you mentioned at the end there, like how can we make you the best for the team? Like you get to already kind of determine that whole like conversation of like instead of them having to figure out, okay, what's the role that I want to fill and how do I get there? It's like this is the role we need you to fill type thing.
Exactly. And it's also important that, and this kind of ties into my badminton coaching background, but it's important that what you as a coach want out of them aligns with what they want out of themselves, right? I think that's the only way that you can do it with the right intention. It's like there's no point in forcing a natural, defender to play offense on the air line and play a handle on the air line, right? There's no point. You'll find that sometimes there might be a mismatch, but you'll also find that there are ways that you can segment it and overlap certain skills to make it aligned with what they want and get them closer to their goals as well. So, I mean, that was a big lesson for me when I was starting out as a badminton coach. Is like, how do I get these 5-year-olds to want to get better at badminton, but then also get them to want it as well? And it's like, all right, well, why don't we play this game? Like, you can win a lolly at the end of the class if you do this, right? So, at the very bare bones level, that's the very one-on-one fundamentals level, that's like aligning incentives or aligning their goal with my goal and with their parents' goal as well. But then when you bring it to adults who are playing ultimate frisbee, wanting to make a bigger development in the sport, make a bigger impact in their kind of brand as well, it's kind of the same thing but different. So being able to align what they want with the team's objectives, and there's a skill and there's an art in that, and I think that's the beauty of coaching.
For sure. Also, what an underrated like experience, I guess, like having coached badminton for so long, especially 5-year-olds. Like I think people really underestimate like how good of a coach it makes you when you have to work with youth athletes. Like when you have an adult and someone who's like very cognitive, cerebral, whatever you want to call it, like it's easy to have a logical conversation with them and get them to like rationalize what's happening. But with like a 5-year-old, you can't do that. You just got to be really, really good about, yeah, your incentives, like you're saying, but also I imagine your cueing, like you can't tell them the same things that you would tell an adult, right?
No, you're exactly right. I mean, the reason why it was such a tough but fruitful experience for me was I not only had to teach 5-year-olds, but I had to teach 5-year-olds and 55-year-olds in the same class of 10.
Wow.
And so for me, it's figuring out at the time, figuring out all the nuances of grouping and then all the nuances of different goal setting and setting different objectives for different players. I mean, it's the same as Ultimate, right? Every player in your team, you have different groups, you have different levels. And so, and this is probably more of an issue when it comes at when you have more, at Australia, we have like university training, right? College training, and there's open invites, things like that. And so sometimes you get put up with, two or three very distinctly different level of players. And so there's a lot of skill in being able to group them in an effective way so that, again, what your goals are, having a cohesive training, getting them all to get better aligns with what each of their individual goals are. And so, like, you can't make it a really basic training. The elite players are not going to like that. You can't make it too complex. The beginners aren't going to improve at all, right? And so there's the nuances in grouping and chunking and all these coaching techniques that I kind of built up over that time coaching badminton that I try to take over to Ultimate as well.
Absolutely. And so I guess you mentioned like the accountability piece as well of coaching, just kind of tie it back to it's kind of like the online versus the in-person thing. But yeah, you mentioned the accountability piece of the coaching in the group. For people who might not have, I guess, direct access to like an accountability partner or like a mentor that's helping them out, or for whatever reason they don't want to join the group, which they would be crazy not to, if there's that many people there for support. Like what are some things that you would recommend from like an accountability perspective and a support perspective to help them out?
Yeah, that's a great question. What would I recommend when it comes to accountability? Well, I think the first thing is identifying that accountability is an important part of your development. We all probably had that teacher at high school that didn't check our homework. And for that particular class, I would say that most viewers probably didn't do their homework for that class. And so you can already see in that example, it's very clear that accountability, when somebody even checks your homework, means that you're more likely to get it done, right? It's just an inherent part of training, of developing, and of getting work done and trying to reach a high level in any aspect of your life. And so for Ultimate, step one is figuring out, okay, yeah, identifying I do need accountability. Step two is figuring out, okay, who can you actually get accountability from? Well, there's actually a fun statistic. If you write down what your goals are and you share it with one other person and you catch up every week on those goals. So all you need to do is write down your goal. I'll tell you, Justin, that this is my goal, and we'll talk once a week for 15 minutes about what the goal is, right? That's all you need to do without adding any extra work, anything at all, without training more, without thinking more, anything. Just by doing those three things, you increase your chance of reaching that goal by 95%. And so you'd be stupid not to go ahead and try and find an accountability partner, right? It doesn't have to be someone professional. It doesn't have to be me. It can be me if you want, reach out to me, of course. But it could be your mom. It could be your brother. It could be your best friend. You could be someone you just met at training. Right. It could be your dog if you want to sit down with them and, write down your notes with them and share them with them once a week. But the idea is, as long as you write down what you want and hold yourself accountable to it and actually tell other people about it, then that's going to increase your chances of success. Now, that's the last piece of my development kind of equation, right? But the first two pieces is kind of getting that right knowledge in. And so I'd encourage you guys to find the best resources online, see if you guys can get that right knowledge. So not only are you staying accountable, but gain the right knowledge so that you can get closer towards your goals a little bit faster. I'm not saying it has to come from me, right? There's plenty of resources out there. Go and find who you like and go and find the resources that you like the most that work for you.
For sure. I like that. Just to kind of add on that too, I would say like it's completely understandable too to know that like that process of actually telling your goal to somebody else like is sometimes a scary process. Like it's a vulnerable process. Like, you mentioned you started posting kind of as like a journal to like document your progress. Initially I started posting just to share content, but as you might have seen, like with over the last kind of year, like a lot of my own training and my own process has kind of bled into what I post. And that's a little bit of a scary process. Like, I'm not going to lie, like me being the fitness guy, me being the guy who's like, quote unquote, always training for Ultimate, like to be like, hey, I have this goal of making this team. And then I don't make the team. Like, I look like a failure. I look like a fraud. Like I look like I don't know what I'm talking about. Right. And so I can completely relate that like it is a little bit of a scary and vulnerable process, but it's also something that like just the act of like, hey, I told this other person that this is my goal. Like, all right, now I got to do it. Like, or at least I got to start to work towards that goal. I think is a really important step too.
It's terrifying. Right. Even when I started, it's absolutely terrifying putting myself on the camera. And I'm not saying that, if you want to stay accountable, you need to post videos of yourself online. But it's terrifying to sometimes, just tell a colleague what your goal is for the next 6 months or 12 months. Right. But I think the question I would pose to those people that are thinking, oh, I'm not sure if I should go ahead and share those goals is to think back and understand yourself. Do I care more about reaching that goal and getting closer towards making a bigger impact or making that team? Do I care more about getting close to that? Or am I more scared of that embarrassment or that little bit of discomfort that arises from sharing my goal? And I think if you come back and you think about which one you care more about, I think you'd care more about making a bigger impact or getting closer towards your goals. And so when I share that with my members, I get them closer towards kind of sharing with me their goals. And for some of them, it's very daunting, right? They're like, oh, I haven't told anyone this before, but I want to be an O-line handler one day, right? And I'm like, yeah, Timmy, you can, right? You totally can. Like, back yourself. You can do it. And so the second someone tells me this, and I was going to bring my bottle to this conversation, but I'd left it at training on Thursday. So shout out to Sunder for holding on to my bottle. But if you have a goal with you right now, right, this is what I want you to do. What I want you to do. 3 things. You're going to write down what type of player you want to be in that role. Okay. So it can be O-line handler or D-line defender. For me, on my bottle, I have dominant defender. And so all you do is get some sports tape and you put it onto your Nalgene and you write those words in text for us, in permanent marker, the words. For me, dominant defender. Again, I was going to bring my bottle. I didn't bring it. That's the first thing, is what role you want to do. The second thing is the team you want to play for, right? If you don't have a particular team you want to play for, that's okay. Write down, the team you currently play for if you want to make a bigger impact there. But ideally get a sticker from that team if they have it. So for me, on my bottle, I have the Australian Dingoes, the Australian Opens team, which is a team that I've never played for before. But I have a lot of people that I train with that play for that club. And so for the next rotation, maybe it's on the cards. So I have big letters, dominant defender, down the side of my bottle, a big Dingoes sticker right in the middle. And then underneath that, this is the last thing, is you got to write a date. So for me, it's 2028, the next world cycle. And so for you guys listening at home, do those 3 things. What role you are, and it's going to be scary, right? But write it down, your sticker or the name of the team that you want to make, and the date that you want to make it. Okay, it might be a particular month, it might be a particular year. Now, there's one big reason why this is scary. Why? Because you carry your bottle everywhere with you. So I go around to Sunday training, even though I've never played for the Dingoes, and everyone sees my bottle saying, I'm going to be a dominant defender trying to make the Dingoes in 2028. It's terrifying. It's daunting, right? It's probably less daunting than you think. And the idea is if I can keep those words on my bottle, every time I go and have a sip, I get reminded, Eric, dominant defender. I've got to be Dingoes quality by 2028. Okay, so let me be Dingoes quality now. So that helps me keep that goal front of mind for me so that when I'm going out to train, every little drill, right, I know, okay, cool, dominant defender, I'm reminded. So whatever that goal is for you, I'd encourage you, write it down, like literally do it now, get some sports tape, do it, right? This will certainly, definitely increase your chance of reaching that goal by 95% or more. So it'd be silly not to do it. So go ahead and do it.
Here we go. Sports tape sales about to go through the roof too. New water bottle sales going through the roof.
Yeah. I'll include a discount link for my Nalgene in the comment section below.
No, that's great though. I think the actionable stuff is always awesome. And I think, yeah, that's really, really good. Cool, Eric, we're coming up on time here soon. So I'm going to kind of go through my last couple questions here. This is also kind of flown by, which is crazy.
That's what happens when you have a great conversation with 2 huge minds in the sport.
Two influencers. So I guess that kind of leads me into my question then. I'm kind of interested a little bit on what's your experience been like as quote unquote influencer. It's kind of cringy as it is to say. Like, I mean, I'm also one myself. Like, ultimate Frisbee influencers, like how has that affected you, like, with your team or the people when you go to tournaments? Like what's that process like?
Yeah. Well, there's two sides of it. All right. The first side is, I wouldn't call it negative. I'd call it interesting. Right. Sometimes you get just a few memes or interesting comments around the circles, and it's all in good faith. It's all good fun. But people will make a few remarks about kind of Eric being the influencer guy, and that's fine. I think for me, like, I know what I'm trying to achieve, and so I'm happy to swallow that pill and kind of go along with the joke sort of thing. So that's the first bucket. You get a few more comments on that side. The second bucket is the other side of the coin, which is people reaching out every now and again, right? Maybe this online or maybe even in person, and they just say, "Thank you so much for this one particular video," or "Thank you so much for this one drill." All right, I hadn't thought about this particular way of catching before, and on Thursday Night League, I didn't drop a disc for the first time ever, right? And sometimes you get, people say hi to me in tournaments, and they say, "Hey, you don't know me, but my name's John, and or my name's Sam, and I really like, I've been following you for ages, and you really helped me develop in this area." And it's really cool. And then I'll get stories like one of my teammates, James Bray, he went to the US Open just last year, and he said, "Oh, this kid from Youth Club Nats came up to me, probably like 15, 16 years old, and said, 'Oh, do you train with Eric Deng?' And he was like, 'Yeah.'" And I kind of hear that story when he comes back from training. So comes back from the US. So you get definitely two sides of the coin. Like, some of it is a bit more interesting, which is how I define it, and you kind of get to run with it, and it's a bit more fun. And maybe you'll have a similar experience. But the other side is kind of the reward aspect of it. Some people just really appreciate getting that knowledge. And again, like, the reason why I'm sharing all this is because I wish I had all this when I started. And so, fair enough. Like, I'm glad that I was able to help someone with the knowledge that they wish they had when they're in their development journey as well.
For sure. No, that's awesome, man. Yeah. I think it's with social media, it's like so easy to access so many people that I think we forget like the sheer amount of people that we actually impact. Like 100 people, like you get 100 views on social media, it doesn't seem that much, but if you got 100 people in front of you, you're talking to, like, it's crazy the difference, right? And so, yeah, I definitely relate. Like recently, I've been trying to do a lot more like um gratitude type self for myself, or yeah, for myself, like gratitude journal and things like that. And yeah, I've really been reflecting on like, yeah, all the DMs and comments I've gotten of like people that I've helped, and it's a really fun experience. It's kind of I guess it helps fuel like making more content and the podcast and things. Yeah, any funny stories? I'll share one as well, but any funny stories from like the interesting side of things that you mentioned?
There was there are a few funny stories. Yeah, certainly. I'm just trying to recall if there's any one thing that comes to mind that I'd like to share. Just remarks over, like, in the club, like, there'll be funny memes people will say. Like, for example, I left my water bottle at training on Thursday, which is why I don't have it right now. And one of our captains say, "Oh, can someone pick up my water bottle? Just put it in the kit bag." One of our captains comments, "Oh, comment water bottle for 50% off your second morning," because it was my second time that I had done. So kind of alluding to the kind of the many chat automations I've got on in the Instagram. But yeah, you just get funny stories like that here and there. Like, people will make remarks and yeah, things like that. But it's all in good faith, and it's all for a bit of a laugh, and happy to be a part of that, because I know those guys are supportive of me and what I'm trying to share as well.
For sure. That's awesome too. Yeah, for me, I've gotten, yeah, similar experience. I've gotten a lot of those like funny interactions. I think the one that sticks out in my mind the most is September. So this is sectionals, in the US Club Series, but we're playing a team that I would consider like our rival. So it's usually a pretty chippy, pretty heated game when we play. And I'm guarding probably the other team's best player. He throws and then immediately starts going up line. So I'm kind of bumping shoulders with him, trying not to let him get that up line space, and then kind of lowers the shoulder and just pushes me out the way. And I go flying pretty much into the other team's sideline. And I call foul. Obviously, him and I were cool. Like, we talked about it. Like, we were both very calm about it. But the other team's sideline was all like, "Oh, TOBU, you do do all these strength workouts, and you're over here calling foul soft. And I was like, oh, okay, bet. Uh, so that was probably the one that sticks out the best. I think last year at the same tournament, so 2023, I'm notorious for not laying out or being really bad about laying out. So there was one where I was going deep for a disc, laid out, and like my knee came up, like the worst possible layout form. Yeah, I didn't get the disc, and then I could hear the whole sideline like, "Oh, he needs to make a video on laying out, yada yada." So stuff like that. Like you said, it's in good faith, but it's definitely funny when you hear it.
I'll tell you another funny story, which was I was playing League the other week, and I had a player mark up against me. Lovely guy. His name was Zenith. So shout out to Zenith if you're watching. But he kind of started marking me at the one. Right, I'm at the one, and he's like, as he gets onto me and starts marking me, he says, "Oh, Eric, I'm a huge fan." Right, I make a cut for the inside shot. He immediately gets a layout block on me. I was like, all right, clearly not that big of a fan then.
Dude, probably the highlight of his whole league. Then I bet.
Yeah. Good on him. And yeah, shout out to Zenith if you're watching. Good on you. Keep it up. Keep doing what you're doing.
He's telling his grandkids about that for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Next kind of question. This is one I pulled from another podcast that I heard, and I really, really like this, is rant and a rave. So this can be about anything in ultimate frisbee. It could be about the coaching side, the playing side, whatever it is. But yeah, one thing you want to rant about that you think is bad, and one thing that you want to rave about that you like what you like, you like what you're seeing in the ultimate space.
Yeah, I think, and I know you shared this with me, this question in particular beforehand, and I kind of spent some time really thinking about it and trying to figure out like a good answer. Initially, I was like rant and rave. I don't know. I think what I settled on was my rant to be, I think people get caught up in the weeds a little bit when it comes to development, and they constantly think about, what's that next team that I want to make, or what do I need to work on? And it's tough, right? You kind of think about, okay, what is that team I'm trying to make, and what role do I need to go for, etc. I think my rant would be, it's always good to take a step away from that and think about finding your own brand as a player. And when I say brand, it's not just how you play, like on the field. It's not just like what type of player you are on the field, but it's also like how you carry yourself on the field, right? Find a brand that you enjoy embodying and playing in the long term, because that is what you're going to be carrying with you from game to game, from training to training. And I think I've gone through seasons of this. I've gone through seasons where my brand as a player, that, when I was training and playing and stuff, was more of that, angry, bitter type of player, right? And certainly that might be beneficial in some, heated matchups. I don't know, maybe it is, right? But now that I've kind of graduated from that season, I think I'm finding a little bit more impact, being more of that, not jovial, but more of that lighthearted and spirited, intense, but invigorated, smiling type of player. And so I think, like, again, you go through seasons, but my rant would be just, I'd encourage those people out there to take a step back a bit and think about, what is your brand as a player? Not only what type of player you are in the field, but how you want to embody yourself on the field, and then take some steps to get closer towards that type of player and that brand of player as well.
Awesome.
My rave. God, my rave. Ultimate Frisbee is such a good sport, no? I don't know if I can critique any one thing about it. Oh, sorry. Rave is something good. It's good. I love it. Yeah, it's very exciting to see, especially the international competitions coming up. And I guess both a rave and a rant is the calendar, the Ultimate Frisbee calendar. It's so busy between, domestic championships to international championships to AUGC to beach, right? It's just busy. So I think it's both a rant and a rave. It's thinking, okay, cool. Like, how can us as ultimate Frisbee athletes try and do as much as we can without doing too much? Obviously, it's tight on the wallet as well. But it's also such a beautiful part of our community. It's such a rave in the sense that you, like, anywhere you go, any country you go to, or most countries you go to, you will find a community of ultimate Frisbee athletes. And so I think that's my goal as well. Is like seeing if I can connect people from different communities so that when you do decide to go on holiday or you move countries, it's like you find exactly that network of players that you need to support you in this beautiful sport, but also in life more generally, right? Some of my closest friends now are people that I met on the Ultimate Frisbee field. So my rant is find your brand. Don't just get into the weeds and think about how to get better. Think about who you want to be. And my rave is Ultimate Frisbee is such a good community-based sport, and you can find community anywhere. And so that's my big goal when it comes to doing all this. And I kind of sat down at the beginning of the year and I thought, okay, what's my goal with content, with social media, and doing this community and doing coaching, things like that. And I came to this one statement, which was to help 1 million Ultimate Frisbee players find community and make a bigger impact.
I love that. Yeah,
So that's the goal. That's the goal.
yeah, that's really good. Really thoughtful. Last question. Here is my favorite question. If you've listened to the podcast before, you know it's coming. But I like to know, like, in my content, probably in yours as well, right? We provide a lot of the answers, but it's always like the questions are the things that are most interesting to me, especially like the unsolved questions, right? So I want to know, like, what are the best minds in the sport or just in any field, like questioning and then they don't have the answer to it yet. Like, I want to know what keeps LeBron James up at night thinking about basketball, right? So for you, Eric, like, what's that big question that you have about Ultimate that you just haven't figured out the answer to?
Yeah, that's a great question. And again, like you asked me this prior, and I kind of spent some time thinking about it. And I think, like, in terms of a player, I've got to a spot where I can kind of get all the knowledge to take me to that next level in my game. And so I have those resources around me. So I think the thing that remains unsolved in my kind of frame of mind aligns more with, what I'm trying to achieve on the coaching side of things, and with my big goal statement that I kind of stated there. And the unsolved question for me that keeps me up at night is, what is the best way to get more up and coming players exposed to the elite knowledge that they need to do what they want in the sport? Because I think, like, and you'll probably resonate with this as well, but making content is one way. And we talked a little bit about how you can get the most knowledge out there. But for me, that's the core problem, is like, I made this because I made all the content and everything because that's what I wanted to have when I was first starting. So the question that keeps me up at night is thinking, what is actually the best way to get more of the knowledge, everything that I'm learning when I was trained for Worlds, everything I'm learning when I trained for Sunder, everything I'm learning when I'm training at Sunder and training for the next big thing. What is the best way that I can get all of that knowledge inside my brain, inside from the experience of other players around me? How can I give that to the players that need it in a way that they can actually consume it and apply it effectively, right? Again, Ultimate's huge. Would it make sense for me to tell them or to explain everything or to have you consume everything all at once? But what is actually the best way for me to help as many people as I can make a bigger impact in their game? And I know it sounds like a little bit, I don't know what the word is, but ambitious maybe, but like, it's really what I wish I had. And that's the reason why I did this, is to hope to just help that, little kid that teenager at night who wants to play on that universe point line, right? On his youth club team, right? That's what I'm doing this for, is like, can I give that person sleeping at night thinking about wanting to play universe point the next day, can I give them that one thing that's going to help them get closer to that goal?
For sure. That's awesome. So not even just like the medium or like the format, right? But like how to articulate like what the message is, how to articulate it, and then how to best deliver it. It is a tough question.
Yeah, hence keeps me up at night.
Yeah. Like it. Well, cool. Eric, that's pretty much everything. Yeah. Where can you want to tell people a little bit more about yourself? Like, where can people find you? Where can they contact you? And then tell us more about like what the long-term vision is. Like, what can people expect from you?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you enjoyed kind of the resources that I've talked about or the content that I talked about, first of all, first point of contact is Instagram. It's Eric D on Instagram. It's Eric DEE on Instagram. And that's where you can kind of get all my updates. I post on my stories, things that are happening as well. So that's where you can get updated. if you want to work with me and kind of join the community that I was talking about, it's a completely free community that you guys can jump in and check it out, get some free resources there. The way you'd get there is school.com/ultimate. So SKOOL.com/ultimate. So yeah, pretty good to get that URL as well. So school.com/ultimate, really easy for you guys to remember. School with a K.
Awesome. Cool. And we'll have that down in the description as well. His Instagram, everything like that down there. But yeah, that's everything. Eric, thanks for being on the show.
Thank you, Justin. It's great to see what you're doing, and I'm very excited to both work together on this journey to spreading the knowledge and helping more people out there get better at the sport, which you'll know and love.
You've been listening to the TOBU Fitness Podcast. Our passion is to be your guide in elevating your game and mastering the art of ultimate Frisbee through the lens of strength and conditioning. No hype, just substance. We hope you've enjoyed the show. If you did, make sure to like, rate, and review. We'll be back soon, but in the meantime, hit us up on Instagram and YouTube at TOBU Fitness. And to get info on one-on-one coaching and training programs, hit the website at TOBUFitness.com. Thanks so much for listening, and see you next time on the TOBU Fitness Podcast.